Alright gang, I am back and today I want to give a quick intro of Flask. Flask is a micro framework that's really nice if you're just learning frameworks and if you're just learning Python and if you're just learning like REST APIs and stuff like that. It's a micro framework and it doesn't have a whole lot of bells and whistles. However, it has huge capabilities because there are a ton of bells and whistles of external libraries that you can install and use with it. For example, if you need like logging capability or authentication capabilities, there's libraries that you can use to plug in that can do all that. Now, it's very simple and very easy. It's a very easy framework to use when you're first starting. That's why I like it, and it's a good. You can use it for like REST APIs or like single page web applications. You can use it for a lot more than that. It's very powerful. But it's very simple and it's easy to get started with. So it's a nice introduction to frameworks. This video is sponsored by Idle Sleep. Idle Sleep brings sleepers the highest quality sleep to be found, backed by the strongest warranty for a lifetime. Longest in-home trial of 18 months and free shipping and free return. So for a great night's sleep, try Idle Sleep. Go to bitsandbytes.io/idlesleep. That's bitsandbytes.io/idlesleep. All right, so the first thing that you might notice on your screen is that I'm using Pycharm now. I switched from Thani to Pycharm. This is Pycharm Community. Pycharm is my go-to IDE, and I like it for a lot of reasons. It has a lot more capabilities than Thani, and I'm used to it. It's what I use for full-time development. Thani's good if you're doing little things, but when you start getting into other things, when you're using databases and things like that, it's nice to have a more robust and more capable IDE. So you'll notice what I did is I created a new project. So the way you do that is you should go to File, New Project, and then you just pick the path where you want to put your project, and then you click Create. You'll see that it's using virtual env, so it's going to create a new virtual environment in that folder. And if you look over here, you'll see our virtual environment is here. So now the next thing we're going to do is we are going to go in and we are going to, oops, I didn't mean to click that, create a new configuration. So we go to here and then we click Add. And then we'll say Python. And what a configuration is a configuration allows you to set up your Flask application so that we can execute it and debug it and stuff like that right from our IDE. Okay, so essentially what I did was I opened up the window to create our configuration. And what we can do, we're not going to use a script path. A script path can be used if you want to point to a specific script to execute. So this add configuration adds a configuration to our IDE to give us the ability to run our application via Flask. So I didn't explain it very well the first time. So we're going to use module name, and then I'm just going to call it Flask. And then we're going to give it a couple parameters here. So we'll do run, because when you run a Flask app, when you install Flask in a virtual environment and then you type Flask run, it'll execute your application. However, we now have to tell it which application we want to run, and we have to tell it what environment we want it to run in. So there's different environments. There's development, test, production. We're going to just do development. And so these variables can be used outside of an IDE as well. You can execute this from the terminal, for example. So you would just create an environment variable based on the ones that I'm creating now. So you'd create Flask app. And then we'll set that equal to our application name, which we're just going to call it app.py for now. And that's a file we haven't created yet, but we're going to create that in a minute. And then we'll tell it which environment we're going to run in. And we'll just do development, And there's all sorts of different options that you can configure, like you can configure the host. By default, when you execute Flask, Flask is not, it's only accessible via localhost on your local machine. In order to make it accessible outside of your local machine, you would have to set the port and the host. Well, you don't have to set the port, but you have to set the host to 0.0.0.0. And the reason for that is it gives you, it opens it up so that it's accessible outside of the local host environment. But the problem is you're not going to want to do that you're not going to want to run it in production. There's other ways of running it in production, which I'm not going to talk about today, but I will provide a link for that. Then the next thing we have to do is we have to set our working directory, and we want to point that to our bin directory where our virtual environment is installed, so right here. So it goes to venv and then bin, and then we can just click OK or apply. Keep in mind, if you're just starting out, Pycharm is it's one of the more complicated IDEs. So it has a lot of functionalities and a lot of features. It's a plethora of abilities, but it's really good. So if you're just starting out, it's always a good idea to start out with something simpler so you're not overwhelmed. Atom is a good one, Thani is a good one, or you can just start out in the command line using VI or something like that, or if you're on Windows, you could use Notepad or something to start with. It's always good to start simple and then build your skills as you go along. Okay, so now you'll see that we have our application configured, but we don't have an actual application yet. So we're going to create an extremely simple application, and it's going to be similar, it's going to be equivalent to like a Hello World application, which is really all you need to get started, but we're going to go through a couple different things here. So we're going to create a file. Remember, in our configuration, we set the environment variable to, let's see, I got to go into edit. We set our environment variable to app.py. So that's what we're going to create right now is our app.py. So we'll do new Python file, app, and then it's going to create that file. Do you want to add it to the Git? Yeah, sure. I don't have a Git repository right now, at least configured yet. And then we're going to go in here, and we have to, in order to use Flask, we have to import it. And the way we do that is we would say, because we have to, actually before we even do that, we have to install it with pip. So we have to do down here in the terminal, this is a terminal, this gives me terminal access, and it's running in my current virtual environment, which was created up here when I created my project. So then I'll just do pip install Flask, and I'll run it, and it'll install it into my virtual environment, so that way I have access to it. So then I can go from Flask, import Flask. That's how you get access to Flask itself. And then I'm going to add another thing here that we're going to use in a minute. This enables us to escape characters, and you'll see why we need to do that in a minute. And then we're going to say app, and here comes our old friend that you've seen in other videos. Oops. Having a little bit of a delay on my computer for some reason. Flask name, remember that guy resolves to main or the name of the module that you're in. So like if you're importing another module, it would resolve to that module, but since we're using it in this module, it's just going to resolve to the main underscore underscore main underscore underscore. That was covered in one of my other videos. So now we're going to create a decorator, or we're going to use a decorator that's built into Flask, and we're going to let's see, it's route, and this is how we configure our routes. So a decorator is just a special variable that has methods, really is what it is, and it defines how your method it configures how your method is going to be, what its abilities are really when you define a method underneath it. So I don't know if you're familiar with decorators, but they're not that difficult to understand. You can actually create custom decorators too, but this one's built in. So this one is going to configure routes so that we can create a method to actually, when we start our application, we can call a URL, and it will actually go to this route, and it'll access and complete whatever functionality we define in our method underneath this route. So this is the root route, it's defined with a slash. And so the way that works is if I go to like for example, scottmacri.com, if I type that in and I hit enter, it would go to this route. So, just an FYI, I'm in the process, I got another website, bitsandbytes.io, and I'm in the process of building a web application. That's why I've been on hiatus for a couple weeks, because I've been building a web application to replace my existing website. So that'll be out shortly. And then I got a few other applications that I'm working on, and then we'll cover some stuff with those later. So we defined our decorator, and now we're going to create our method that our decorator is going to use. Oops. Hello, and I'll just call, I guess we'll just go bits and bytes, B&B, not bed and breakfast, return, and then we'll just do something like okay. Yeah, that looks good. And then now we're going to create some more of these in a minute. So this has squiggly lines underneath it like that. And what this is, when you type and you write code in Pycharm, it actually corrects you. And it's using Pylint behind the scenes so that it uses the PEP stuff, the PEP 8 I think it is, where you it's certain standards for how to write your code, how to make it look when you write it, and how to write methods. And you can only have a specific number of lines in your method, things like that. And it'll correct you as you go along. So that's complaining because it wants a double space above here. So once I do that, it'll fix it. Then I can save this file. And then now what we can do is we can open up a browser. And I use Brave as my browser. I don't know what you guys use. You can use Firefox or Chrome or whatever you want to use. Now, what I'll do is I'll do localhost, and then it's going to be, actually before we do that, we got to start it. So if you remember before we created all this config, this add configuration, so now you're going to see what it's actually going to do. If we did everything correctly in our code, this is going to start. And then it's going to execute Flask. So now you can see Flask is running localhost, that's the localhost IP address, and then port 5000. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop open our browser, and over here, yeah, you can see that I was doing something over here with 8000, but we're going to use 5000. And when I run this, you're going to see hello from Bits and Bytes. And you're seeing that. Actually, I'm going to do one thing here real quick. Okay. I guess you can't do that in this browser. No, you can't. I was looking, a lot of applications have an option to say, if you right click on here, you can say always on top. So that way when I click over here, it keeps the browser on the front. But that's okay. All right, so you're going to see our results here. Hello from Bits and Bytes. Now what we're going to do is Flask has different types that you can pass in that it supports for the URLs. It supports integers, floats, strings, UUIDs, and paths. And we're going to go through a couple of those. Well, it supports them as parameters for the URL is what I mean. So we'll go through this. Let me move this window out of the way a little bit. And we'll create another method now. And we'll use our decorator. route, and we'll give it a new route name, and we will say, let's do something like hello. And now we're going to define a variable for a URL. So when I call the URL, I can type in a parameter there, and it's going to use that parameter inside the method that we define below. So when we do that, I'll do a slash, and then we can define the type that we want it to be. In this case, we're just going to say a string, and then we'll say something like name. And then we'll create our method, name. This is where the magic happens. So this name parameter or argument is actually going to get passed into this parameter field here. Okay? When you execute that URL. And then we'll type some stuff here to display on the screen using that variable. And what title does is it's just like it capitalizes the first character of the letter. And then we'll put a breakpoint in here because it's going to be returned as HTML. I'll put another space up there because it's complaining. We'll hit save. We'll bring the browser back. And then now, let me shrink this down a little bit because we don't need the whole thing. Now in the 5000, after the port 5000, we could just type hello. And then I can put a name in. I'll put my name in. Oh, and it says route not found. There's a reason for that. And the reason is because I can't spell. And it should be name. Oh wait, that is correct. All right. Now that's still throwing a 404. Why? Let's see. All right, let's try to restart this. Not sure what happened. There we go. I just had to restart the server. For some reason, it didn't automatically restart. I'm not sure why. But you can see that it took my name, it put an uppercase on it, and then it added it to the return statement. All right, so there's that. And what this is doing is this is performing a get method. Sorry about that. What this is doing is this is performing a get method. My microphone fell off my shirt. And you can tell it's a get method because it's getting passed in through the URL, like through the browser like that. And that's really the only thing we're going to discuss today. And we'll get into other HTTP methods at a later time. So the next one we can talk about real quick is we can do something like there's a path parameter type that you can use. So let's just do app route, and then we'll do something like see, that's the configure the converter type. That's called a converter, and it converts this type to a path, and this one converts whatever is in here to a string. And then there's ones for integers and floats and stuff like that. And what the path does is it takes a string and then it escapes it and allows slashes to be used. That's an important one. So if you do, path, and then we'll say my path, and we'll do that, and then we'll create our method, show path, and my path. Now again, the my path argument gets passed into this parameter here as the parameter, or as the argument for that parameter, I should say. And then we'll return my path. I can't type today. Path is, and then this is how you put a variable inside of a string with these little squiggly brackets. And here's where we're going to use the escape. And that's going to give us what we need to do. We got to do this double space up there for Pycharm, make Pycharm happy. And then now, if we type this right, we should be able to type in our URL up here as /showpath. And we can pass in a path here, something like, I don't know, if we do something like C. Oops, what happened? My computer. Show path C colon, I don't know. Something like that. Oh, request not found. What do? Do we have to restart it again? Maybe. Shouldn't have to restart this every time. There we go. I'm not sure why it's not working. Normally in Pycharm it auto restarts. But you can type in whatever path. Yeah, I realize I'm not a Windows guy. That's not a thing. But you can type in whatever. Like you could do something like that. You know. You could probably, I don't know if you could put a slash in front of that. It won't recognize it. But so you can get like a subpath. And then you could use that to execute in your code to do something on the back end. And the next one let's do a quick thing here using a float. Integer's the same. And then we'll just do, and let's say, we'll just do like a square function. We'll make the converter type a float. You can create custom converter types too. I don't know why you would really want to, but strings usually do a pretty good job for most things. All right, my float, pass this argument into that parameter as an argument into there. You know what I mean. It's late. Return, and then we'll do, well, maybe you don't know what I mean. Basically, we're going to pass the value of this variable into this method so that we can use it inside. Oh, got to keep it inside the string. So what we're going to do is we're going to print out this information to the screen like we did with the other ones. Now I'm curious as to why this isn't auto restarting, because normally with Flask it does. I might have to set, there's a variable somewhere or a config setting somewhere that you might have to make, but I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, so I'm not going to mess with it right now. So in here we will call square float, and then we'll put a number 5.5, and then it's going to 5.5 squared is 30.25, which is true. So that is a quick introduction to Flask. And basically what we did is we went and we created a new project, file, new project. We set that up. That created a new virtual environment inside of our folder that we set up here in our new project. Our project path is different though. You can see the full path right here. Then the virtual environment, we set up our configuration here. We switched this to module name. We set Flask. We said Flask. The argument we want to pass to Flask was run, so that it actually starts it and executes it. And then we passed in these environment variables. Flask app, which points to the app file that we created, which is your application when you start it up. And then actually, that should be Flask. It still worked without it, but I have a feeling that's why it wasn't restarting, is because the environment wasn't set. So every time when you saw when I put it in there and I had to go hit restart, that's why, because it was looking at production, because the default is production, which I should have seen when I look down here. It's in, it should say, yeah, right here. No, it doesn't. It should say the mode somewhere, but anyways, the default, I believe, is production. So I think that just wasn't catching. So now when we start it and we create a new one, it should restart automatically. I shouldn't have to click up here to restart it. I should have caught that earlier, but so okay. So we set the Flask environment to development, because if you're running in production mode, the debugger is disabled, and the debugger is what kicks in that auto restart mode. So we'll click OK on that, and you can look over here. You can see all of our virtual environment stuff. And then after we got everything configured and created our new project, we built our basic Flask app, our Hello World Flask app. So we imported Flask. We imported escape from markup safe, which is what you use to escape characters in your URLs. And then we set our application. And this application is what executes everything. So this is what enables Flask to start and execute your code, so that to start your application and make these, expose these endpoints as a URL. And then we talked about a decorator here. We used the route to configure our routes for our URLs. We talked about URL parameters, string, path, and float. And we capitalized the first character of my name. And so that concludes our basic intro to Flask. So if you guys have any questions, comments, post them in the comments section. I'll put some notes along with this down there for a URL to the production stuff and a few other things. So, all right, take care.